Before I begin today's video, I want to give a shout out to a great player and good friend of mine who has recently returned to Geometry Dash Extreme Demon Slaying, and is getting some great progress on some really hard levels. I've actually shouted them out before, but that was when I was a much lesser known YouTuber, so I want to give them another boost now and hopefully get them to 1,000 subscribers. The player I'm talking about is Saiveni. Some of you might know her by her old name, Nadia, and she has beaten levels like Zaphakeel, Digital Descent, twice, Bloodbath, and numerous other extremes, as well as having crazy progress on the Golden and Sonic Wave, with her being very close to a Sonic Wave victory as her new hardest. She also plans to beat levels like Cybernetic Ascent in the future, and she is also the verifier of my upcoming Mega Collab. I would really appreciate it if you guys could go take the few seconds out of your day that it takes to go subscribe to her channel and support her on her progress of Sonic Wave, and whatever other endeavors she attempts in the future, as I think she really deserves it. She is one of the most dedicated players I have ever seen touch this game. I really want to see her hit 1,000 subscribers off this shoutout, but that can only happen with all of you. So please go give her some love, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. The Demons List. A title that, in our modern era of Geometry Dash, has become immortalized as one of the key components that determines the way our community operates, thinks, and behaves. This list of extreme demons, placed from most difficult to least, has been seated at the center of the community conscience for nearly half this game's history. The list has been one of, if not the most influential organization to ever be founded in Geometry Dash. In its time, it has managed to completely shift the main focus of the game to difficulty and ranking hard levels above or below others over any other variable. It's commonplace nowadays for new, upcoming extreme demons to be compared relentlessly to other extremes out there by the community, and one of the main interests with any new list-worthy level is where it will place. I'm sure I do not have to stress how important top 1 list demons are to the community, and how much hype they generate. When you think about all these devices of the list, you can realize how integral it has become to the popularization of extreme demons and the push toward increased difficulty in levels. The Demons List has been one of the biggest catalysts for the shift toward the idolization of astronomically difficult levels. With this said, it is not hard to argue why the list has been such an influential establishment. Geometry Dash's Update 2.1 has been the prominent version of the game that the Demons List has reigned in, and with a decent portion of today's active players and community members having been introduced to the game in this era, it's almost undistinguished to some that the Demons List has always been a prominent aspect of the game's culture. But everything has to start somewhere. Today, the list we know and love is incredibly well run, organized, and professional, but it has not always been like this. There are obviously times before the Demons List, before difficulty had come to become such an integral part of the way the community thinks and operates. And obviously, the professional list we know today did not come out of nowhere. So what circumstances led to such a high elite congregation? Well, in this video, I will be taking us back through the history of Geometry Dash to find the answer to this question, as well as to detail all the events that led up to modern day in terms of the Demons List. I doubt many know of how the list came to be or the events that sparked its birth, and even if you do remember bits and pieces, this tale spans such a long period of time that piecing it all together, even with the information at your fingertips, is difficult. The story of the list is a very interesting one that spans many years, and it either evolved with the community mindset at the time or shaped it. I am very excited to tell the story of this beloved operation, as there are so many interesting historical developments and bits of information to unearth. It took me a very long time to gather all the significant events and put them in a sensible order, and it required a lot of digging through old forums and talking to old community legends as well as modern leaders. I have put a lot of time into this one, so I really hope you guys like it. Anyway, I won't keep the intro dragging on any longer. This is the full, complete history of the Geometry Dash Demons List. Please enjoy. To begin our story, we have to travel back to late 2014, a time period in which the community landscape of Geometry Dash was vastly different than the one we understand today. In November of 2014, version 1.9 had just been released, which would introduce the Steam version of Geometry Dash to the public. The community overall was a lot smaller and more tightly knit, and the interests of the larger player base were much less focused on the difficulty of levels. In fact, while players who beat difficult levels were often respected, creators who made absurdly hard works were looked down upon. 1.9 would be the update to change that. The shift toward revering and eventually glorifying harder levels would be a combination of many factors, such as the excitement of watching top players rise to the challenge of extreme levels, characterized by events which should occur later on in the update, such as the story of Ride and Cyclic. But one of the bigger factors that would play into this mentality transition would be one that would arise from the shadows. This story all starts with Lugia, a name that some of you might have heard before. He is a longtime veteran player and creator from the very early eras of the game, and he would be the one to initiate a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the formation of the Geometry Dash Demons list. Lugia was one of the first to take interest in harder levels in 1.9, and in late 2014 he would use this interest to create a passion project of his, the first Geometry Dash Demon difficulty list. While the top demons back then were a lot different than the top demons we have today, as the majority of them were hacked, Lugia's list is a very key development that kickstarts the entire story we're going to be telling in this video. His list would be published on the Geometry Dash forums, a place where many English community members came together and discussed the game, formed connections, and built communities. The forums were an early home to many active players before establishments like Skype and Discord were popularized. Evidently, it was sensible for Lugia to publish his work on the forums, as he was well known in his community and a decent portion of the player base would be able to see what he had created. As you can tell, levels did not actually have to be beaten, only rated, which led to demons like Silent Club holding the #1 spot despite having slim to no progress by top players, much less any sort of completions. When Lugia published the last revision of the list on January 4th, 2015, their top 3 consisted of Silent Club, Ice Carbon Diablo X, and Stereo Demon S. Players commented their submissions under the thread and discussed levels on the list, and this would be the beginning of the first rendition of a Geometry Dash Demons list. But the foundation Lugia built would not be without criticism. In fact, their list would often be bashed in the forums community for being put together without much research, as well as being unsatisfactorily managed, with many aspects of it being outdated, incomplete, and quite plainly incorrect. This criticism was reinforced by Lugia's inactivity and unwillingness to fix the problems of this work, so eventually, a player by the name of Ecruteak would take matters into his own hands. Ecruteak would publish his own spin-off forums list in April of 2015, and would operate very similarly to the way Lugia's did, as it took heavy inspiration. The difference would be that it would be well run in contrast, with a clear-cut system of rules and active management, as well as more accurate information and far better formatting. The top 5 in Ecruteak's list as of April 28th, 2015 would be Ice Carbon Diablo X, Alphabet X, Cataclysm, Twilight Step V2, and Extreme Chaos. Because of the improvements to the list in comparison to the one Lugia ran, Ecruteak's list became somewhat of a significant talking point in the forum community, as well as managing to bring new light to the forums in general. But not all the attention that he was gaining was positive. Because Ecruteak was not necessarily very good at playing the game and in consequence the demons he was ranking, he received a large amount of criticism and disdain from top players at the time who disagreed with how he was placing the levels. Despite this, Ecruteak would continue to run his list for some months, through the summer of 2015. Throughout this time, we would see players like Riot and Cyclic rise to the top and spread their influence throughout the English and Korean communities, and though those stories are separate from the one I am telling here today, they definitely did overlap. As I'm sure many of you know, after Cataclysm and ICDX, Riot would organize his own mega collab, Bloodbath, that would use the same song as Cataclysm. I'm sure I don't have to go into detail about the creation of Bloodbath and the impact it had, but after months of verification, Riot finally beat the level on August 12th, 2015. This was a monumental occasion for the community, and it would be placed as the first huge top 1 demon verification on Ecruteak's demons list. This is significant as it was, in a way, the first big top 1 to rock the community and be placed on the list after being legitimately verified. On August 19th, 2015, Ecruteak's top 5 would consist of Bloodbath, Future Demon S, Cataclysm, ICDX, and Creeper Force. Ecruteak would continue to run his list throughout the rest of the summer, and 2.0 would be released on August 26, 2015. This ended the 1.9 era of the list, and began to transition it into a new chapter of the forum operation, partly because of the new game update, and partly because of the events that would come shortly after. Ecruteak would keep his list up into the fall of 2015, but the post-summer block would begin the downfall of his project and involvement in list history. Like I said earlier, not everyone agreed with how Ecruteak ranked the levels on his list because of his lack of skill to actually play the demons. This problem would eventually transition its way into an entirely new, third forum list being organized in mid-November 2015 by the leading English top player Riot and a group of other significant community members, namely Razor, Heinz, Michigan, and Zobros. This list would have the closest resemblance to the list we know today out of any so far, and it would completely rework the rule system, bringing in new concepts that we enjoy today, such as the requirement for list percentage. Every level on the list now had a certain percent threshold to get records on the list under that level, and this was because of issues with the oversaturation of list records that were insignificant percent numbers in the single digits. The new forum list was made with much more thought behind it, as well as much more educated placings, as a team of top players were now the ones behind it, instead of a single person who was barely able to play the demons. This also shows how this new forum list began to reflect how our list today works. and it is starting to build a foundation for the growth and organization to fill the shoes we expect it to. Riot and his administration of the list would continue to run it through the rest of 2015, and it would receive much more praise and attention than the Lugia and Frestenotch's lists ever could have, with such big community figures behind it. But these events just listed only lay the foundation of the Demons list. These all took place in late 2014 and 2015, meaning we still have some 5.5 years of ground to cover for the rest of this video. These are only the roots of the Demons list. From here, we get to witness the tree grow into a sapling and eventually extend its branches out to the furthest corners of the community, where it reaches today. With the foundation now set, we can move on into 2016, where we will begin to see the first signs of the list developing itself further than any of the participants involved could have at first expected. The turn of the year from 2015 to 2016 would not yield any immediate events of significance for the forum's Demons list. The staff involved continued to grow the operation, selectively bringing in new members to the team to keep it running smoothly. Getting into the list at this point in time was no easy feat. The list higher-ups would come to people that they thought would be worthy of staff, and if no one came to you, there was a very slim chance that you would ever make it in without good connections. As I said earlier, the founding members of the third forum list rendition were Riot, Razor, Heinz, Michigan, Zobros, and a few others. But as the list expanded its prominence in the community and more players submitted progress records on levels, there was a much greater demand for more staff. This is what led to the expansion of the team. The way list record submissions operated at the time was that players replied to the forum post with videos of their scores, but as more and more submissions piled up and the amount of active staff who were actually willing to devote their time to the list grew slimmer and slimmer, more and more issues regarding staffing and accepting records arose. These would be problems that would persist for very extensive periods of list history. But despite these issues, the list continued to run throughout early 2016 into the summer. An interesting thing to consider is at this point, the list was never actually a top 50. Ever since Lugia's list, all renditions had only included the top 40 hardest levels. Though the early parts of 2016 were bland, as summer approached and went underway, things would start to get eventful again. The first big event would be the dethroning of Bloodbath. As many know, Bloodbath was a top 1 demon verified by Riot back in August 2015. Bloodbath began its reign as a top 1 demon on August 12, 2015, and the level to dethrone it would be Sakup in Hell, an extreme demon by Nubas that was verified by Trust on August 15, 2016. This means that Bloodbath was dethroned only 3 days after its 1-year anniversary as top 1, making it one of the levels to longest hold that position in the game's history. This would be a second big top 1 verification in list history, and it was certainly a big event that characterized the community moving beyond the skill ceiling that Bloodbath had set so high. But Bloodbath being dethroned would not be the only big event that happened to the list in mid-August 2016. In fact, this month we would see the first shift in power that Riot's forum list ever experienced. This would mostly be due to a new need for someone who could lead and also exhibit a strong work ethic and passion for the list. Issues relating to lack of investment in the project and the team were some of the biggest problems the list faced with the majority of its members, so finding someone like this who could lead effectively was not easy. They also began to recruit new members with good, passionate work ethics because of this reason, and one of the newest additions to the team was a forum user named Cobalt. Cobalt would become a very active, passionate, and hardworking member of the team after he was enlisted. This led to him being a prime candidate for selection when it came to looking for a new leader. Cobalt was fully ready and excited to take on that new position, so after some decision making from the team, he was granted ownership of the list in mid-August of 2016. Cobalt would make many changes to the list in his early time as leader, including transitioning list records to a Google form instead of the forum as a notable one. These would then be transferred to a spreadsheet, and while this was a more effective system than before, it still led to a lot of records not being accepted and a desire for more active staffing. A better system was still a very big demand, but what Cobalt had come up with would suffice for now. He would keep running his newly owned list for the rest of the summer into the next month, September, when Riot would end up leaving the list and the original forum would get deleted. This would be a pretty big event, as the forum that had lasted for over a year now would be deleted entirely, though there are still preservations of it, and such a key influential figure in not only list history but also the game's history would now be gone from the operation. It is my belief that Riot leaving the list defines the end of an era, the end of the era of the birth of the list, and the transition into the second phase, where new leaders would begin to rise and build a much more refined and well-run operation from the foundation that the old legend set in place. Riot's leaving and the forum's deletion did not cause anarchy. Cobalt and the other head staff would continue to run the list just as well as before, and a new Demons List forum thread was made to replace the old one in October 2016. And it's a good thing the list kept in health, because soon after the events just described, the team would have to make a very significant decision. On November 5th, 2016, Magoste, a famous Geometry Dash hacker, would release a video entitled Geometry Dash Bypass Monitor Hertz Refresh Rate Hack. If you can't tell, this was a video containing the first rendition of the Geometry Dash Refresh Rate Bypass hack that we are very familiar with today. Magoste was already decently famous for his speed hacks and well-known no-clip invincibility hack, so when he released the bypass it gained a significant enough amount of traction for morality and legitimacy questions to be raised about it. Magoste's bypass was very different from the one we know today. It was very unrefined, sketchy, and had no FPS limit. It was also blatantly labeled as a hack in the title of the video, which led to the assumption it was illegitimate. Despite the community already knowing full well about the power of 144Hz monitors, this hack promised the ability to go beyond 144Hz, which was a concept never before explored within the GD player base. This debate would, of course, make its way to the Demons list, and it would raise questions for the staff about whether they should allow records using the bypass or not. This would begin a long series of discussions about the bypass and its allowance in the list, but we'll get into that later in the video. For now, let's talk about how the climate was towards the bypass when first introduced. Most of the list was initially opposed to the bypass, labeling it as a hack that was too sketchy and unlimited in FPS capabilities. On top of this, the team just did not know enough about it or how it worked. The list team not really wanting to learn more about the bypass and really understand it would be a pretty consistent theme throughout the following years. Some members of the team, like GMD Noise, would be opposed to banning the bypass, but when it came down to it, bigger community figures on the team like Michigan would be against its allowance, which pushed down the voices and beliefs of smaller members like Noise. The final conclusion of this first little debate over the bypass would be to shadow ban it. There would never be an official statement regarding its allowance on the list, but any records that used it would be rejected inconspicuously. Not many people actually even knew about the bypass or what it did at this point, which meant there wasn't really much outrage to it being shadow banned, as well as there not being much of a reason to publicly announce it in the first place. Overall, the bypass situation initially was just a preamble to events that would follow in the future. At this point in time, it wasn't all that significant. Just remember the events that transpired here for later. This would not be the only thing worth mentioning in November. On the 25th, Sonic Wave, a legendary extreme demon by Cyclic from 1.9, would be verified by Sonics and would be rated and placed at number 1 on the list a short time later. Sonic Wave was a level leagues beyond any other extreme demon at the time, and the difficulty gap it secured between itself and the rest of the top demons as well as top players was monumental. Sonic Wave would be one of the last developments of 2016 for the list as we near the end of the year. But there are two final things to mention that will transition our story into its next chapter. The first is the change from a list being a top 40 to a top 50. This is a pretty straightforward concept, and it happened due to there being a greater abundance of hard levels. 50 was also a much nicer number than 40, and the change was quickly accepted by the community. The second development ties into the next era of the list, so it's important to explain here. It starts with Stardust, a Discord bot programmer and an individual interested in computer technology. Stardust was aware of the forum list and wanted to take it to the next level. Combining his passion for the list and understanding of Discord bot programming, he started working a bot that integrated the forum list into Discord. However, he wasn't exactly a fan of the forum list. He actually planned to start his own list with his new bot, but some staff from the list caught wind of this, and of course it reached Cobalt's ears. He obviously saw Stardust and what he was doing as competition, but he also saw it as an opportunity that he decided to take advantage of. In late December of 2016, Cobalt would go to Stardust and manage to convince him to work with the forum list instead of starting his own list, integrating the bot into a Discord that would unify Stardust's vision of the list and the list Cobalt already ran and put so much love into. Stardust would modify the Discord bot to not only be integrated but also to manage the list, which was a huge development. But this was in late December of 2016, which means this would have to be the final event for that year. 2016 was a huge developmental year for the list, as it brought the foundation that 2015 set and built on it more and more, making a system of staff and community that would nourish it into its next steps to community dominance. In 2016, the list expanded its reach farther than it had ever gone before, but what progress it made that year would somewhat pale in comparison to the year that would follow. 2017 is one crazy and eventful chapter for the Demons List history. It's definitely one of the more interesting ones to detail, and with the context now being laid, we can really start to get into when the list began to evolve into more than just a simple forum page. So, let's turn the page into the next part of the story. "2017 in its history would pick up right off where 2016 ended. The first thing we should mention is that Geometry Dash version 2.1 was released right at the beginning of 2017, on January 16th. This would be the update where the list would really explode in notoriety. For the first few months of the new year and the new update, Stardust would continue to develop his Discord bot for the list while the team continued to manage the forum and spread its influence throughout the community. Stardust joining the staff and working as hard as he was in the bot would end up creating a breeding ground for the next big event in list history that we definitely have to talk about here. For the first time in the list existence up to this point, it was considered that an official website could be made instead of keeping the list on a forum page, now that they had a passionate computer expert as a member of their ranks. Now, Stardust only really worked with Discord bot development, and he didn't know how to make a professional website at this point. Despite this, the team assumed he would be able to make one with his knowledge, and after being proposed, the higher-ups began to get further excited about the idea. The current forum was poorly formatted, hard to use, and couldn't be expanded on beyond the limits of the forum page. With an official website, everything could be customly made to fit the purposes of the list. On top of this, most community members going to the Geometry Dash forums at this point in time were only going to the Demons List thread anyway, so there was really no reason not to have an official website. There was also a large amount of hatred toward the forums from the wider community. At this point, there was no stats viewer implemented as that was impossible, and there was no way to organize records and have a neater interface that wouldn't require a ridiculous amount of scrolling to make your way through the list. Even with all these benefits in the form of an official website, there was still the problem that the list assumed Stardust would know how to make a website and be willing to do it. Stardust would actually be tasked with the creation of a website via miscommunication. The list staff began to tell some people that Stardust would be developing an official website soon, despite him never actually saying anything of the sort. He was never confronted prior to his contracting to creating a website. But though Stardust never signed up for it, he didn't have the heart to turn down the expectant team. Despite him having little to no experience, he studied and learned website building and began to work out an early version of the Pointer Cray website. And on April 9th, after lots of hard work, the Demons List official website would be up and running. The interface would be somewhat messy looking and a lot different from the one we are used to today, but it was the first website Stardust ever made, so it's reasonable to cut him some slack. The website would end up being a huge hit. It generated massive amounts of hype in the community for the list, and at this point, the Demons List had become a massive talking point and was bringing in new watchful eyes and attention every day. It's key to understand that this was the point in which the list would begin to become an essential institution in the community. From here on, the list would be taken a lot more seriously, with a professional team behind it and an elite organization of highly individuals that were placed on a pedestal on the top of the community. Though the forum was already well known, the official website would be a huge hit, making the list much more accessible and enforcing the idea of it being taken much more seriously within the community. It's no overstatement to say that the official website would be a change in tide, and would begin a new era of the list where the organization would only become more and more serious and professional. And due to how professional and well organized it was, at this point in time the list was very selective in accepting new members. There were no applications, and to get into the list, it was essentially a requirement to have some sort of connection to big names or be a big name yourself. As of the early months of 2017, some of the notable members were Chief Flurry, End Level, Nwalak, Kermal, Michigan, Noise, Quantum, Sir Goliaster, and Serve. Most of these people just listed were decent players or big community figures, with some exceptions just being well-known personalities. Despite such sizable community figures who would seemingly have put passion into work for the list because of how exceedingly prominent it was becoming, the list was still facing record acceptance and work ethic as its biggest downfall. As the list grew more and more, people submitted records in more condensed amounts than ever before. This led to the staff being overwhelmed very often, and there was a clear demand for a better system and more dedicated staff within the operation. Records were again piling up like they were in 2016, but this time on a much bigger scale. The list would try to work this out, but it would take a long time before they found a functional solution. The biggest problem right now is their approach to list staff. They picked the best top players they could find, and not the ones with the most work ethic. But moving on from that, in April of 2017, the Demons List made their official Twitter account and announced they would be interacting with the community and answering questions and talking about list placement choices there. This is an extension of the list that has managed to integrate itself as a much more interactive element of the community, which definitely brought it a lot more attention and notoriety in the up-and-coming Twitter community. These developments would persist through the middle part of 2017, which would be much less eventful than the first third. Summer would pass with the list continuing to run as it is, but in the autumn of 2017, some new developments would be made. In September, we would actually see two new top 1 Extreme Demons, Digital Descent on the 11th and Stalemate Redux on the 21st. Eventually Sonic Wave would reclaim the top 1 spot from both of these levels, but it's still essential history nonetheless. The next month after September would again bear fruitful events. The significant talking point of October would be the decision to extend the list to a top 100 instead of a top 50. This would be a conclusion reached by the list team because of the realization that they had 86 demons in total to ever be on the list, including legacy levels, which meant an extension would only need some 15 more levels, which would be quite easy to achieve. The idea was proposed on October 5th, and the official list extension was published on October 22nd. This would also make the list much more accessible to players who weren't as skilled, which brought more attention and passion for completing extreme demons. You have to remember that at this point, a big portion of the drive for completing extreme demons in the game was the fact that you could get list points. This is where we have to give credit to the list for motivating players to push limits in the game. Without the list, it's very possible that the passion for harder and harder levels that players have today would never have come to be. The second significant event of October would be the revamp of the Pointer Crate website. The old interface for it had been thrown together very quickly, and Shoutout was not satisfied. With some new experience in developing a site, he revamped it and gave it the fresh look we know today, as well as making a mobile interface for the website. This would further accelerate the transition toward the more modern professional list we understand in our current time period. These would all be developments that would concern the public appearance of the list, but on the inside, things were also changing quickly. On November 21st, Cobalt, the list owner that had led since August of 2016, would step down. Active and reliable staff members Delta Blue, Noise, and Aeon Air would then take his place and co-operate the list. The reasons for Cobalt stepping down are private, but it would definitely not be the last we would see of him. In fact, he would return in December, a little over a month later, but there are some events that happened in between then that we need to touch on before we can get to that. On December 16th, 2017, coder and programmer Absolute would release a hack for Geometry Dash that was a refined version of the FPS bypass that Magostia had released a year ago. This version would be much more polished, as it was compatible with all versions and was much less sketchy. It also just worked a lot better in general, and this led to it spreading throughout the community very quickly. The Demons list would once again be confronted with morality and legitimacy questions surrounding this bypass, but this time, they would have an entire community eagerly awaiting their answer towards whether it would be allowed for list records or not. With the bypass never being officially banned in the past, most assumed that it was allowed and submitted records with it. The list was now put in a position where they had to come out with a statement regarding it to address the amount of new records coming in using the bypass. And on December 20th, co-owner Noise would release a video addressing the public in the situation, asserting that they were holding strong on their notion of banning the FPS bypass on the Demons list. Their reasoning boiled down to what they did know versus what they didn't know. They knew the bypass was an outside influence that changed the way the game worked and gave the player an advantage, which was essentially the definition of a cheat. They didn't know how it worked in its entirety, and they didn't take the time to find out more about it. They didn't really ever consider it beyond calling it a hack at the time anyway, as with the list team being all about integrity, it would be very hard for them to admit as to making as big of an error as to misjudge the bypass. This would lead to a lot of hard feelings towards the list and the decision, and it definitely would not be the last we would hear of the bypass debate. But that would be the end of the discussion for 2017, with the year coming to a close very soon. Before this crazy year concluded, Cobalt will return as owner on the 25th of December, and the official Discord server for the list would be made on the 27th. This would make the list much more interactive to the wider community, and it would build relationships outside of just the team. This alongside Twitter would make it all much more interactive community element, which definitely helped its expansion and engagement. But with this happening on the 27th, it would be the last event of 2017. 2017 was definitely a crazy year that began to reflect how our modern list looks rather than the alien forum format that was prominent in 2015 and 2016. The transition into more modern territory would only continue in 2018, so let's not skip a beat and continue moving with the Demons list story. "2018 would be another pretty foundational year for the list. It would definitely benefit greatly from the position that 2017 put the list in. With new additions like the official website, better management, and all-around more professional attitude, 2018 would be a great point for the list to keep moving with its community dominance. Off the back of 2017, the list would continue to engage with the community via Twitter and Discord, and with Cobalt back in leadership, things are looking on the bright side. We would actually see a rise of a new faction of influential members in this defining year, but that's something we will talk about later. The list notably received a new top 1 demon in late January of the new year. This would be Plasma Pulse Finale, the 4th installment in the famous Plasma Pulse series by X-Smokes and Gyron David. This level would defeat Sonic Wave in difficulty, finally dethroning it and giving us a fresh and well-crafted level to idolize as top 1. PPF was a level verified by its creator, X-Smokes, and it was rated and placed on January 27th. Unfortunately, PPF would not hold the top 1 spot for long, as on February 20th, 2018, Bloodlust was verified after years of waiting by Nobbleboy and was placed at number 1 on the list instantly. This was a huge top 1 demon that defined a new era of difficulty, and I don't think I have to beat in how influential and important Bloodlust was as a top 1. But Bloodlust's instant placing didn't come without controversy. Some community members like Anville and Skullo began to express the opinion that Plasma Pulse Finale, the now number 2 demon, was actually harder than Bloodlust, and that it should be moved above the Helltheme Extreme Demon. This evolved into a quite petty Twitter drama where both sides took shots at each other, and their fan bases fought it out on the platform defending one another. This would eventually be worked out with Bloodlust coming out on top, but it definitely shows how list conflicts were making their way around the community and having a very big impact on the state of interactions. Another big drama that involved top players would occur about a month later. This would be the resurgence of the FPS bypass discussion, with top players Sunix and Skullo pushing for bypass to be unbanned. List staff Noise and Ryder would end up going head to head with Sunix and Skullo in a public debate on Riot's Twitch channel for all the community to spectate. While this debate was a seemingly very good opportunity for the party supporting the bypass to state their claims, the list did not budge in their beliefs, and continued to assert the idea that at its core, the bypass was a hack, and hacks cannot be allowed on the list. This was unfortunate for the less hardware privileged community members of the community, and it would be the last we would see of the list officially considering the bypass for a long while. This didn't mean that the list would close off community discussion about list topics forever. In fact, quite the opposite occurred. The list actually opened up their official bi-weekly podcast, which would later be shifted to monthly, in which they would discuss topics relating to the list and open up to the community with their mindset toward them. This would just be another factor that would lead to the list fostering a more interactive element toward the community. The first podcast aired March 10th, meaning it occurred in the early half of 2018. Most things were running smoothly at this point, with the exception of accepting records officially, with more community engagement growing to the list faster than ever before. But a new defining period of the list would be coming soon. With the joining of members like Technical in April of 2018 and Nepesta in May, there would start to be a new public appearance by some fresh top players who would start to take control of the list. Players like TGI and Gunnerbones were also part of this new wave of list leaders. This would be further defined by when, in August of 2018, old leader Cobalt would permanently step down from the list. Cobalt had led the list for over 2 years at this point, but after repeatedly making bad decisions as owner in 2018, staff and leaders on the team suggested that he step down. When he wouldn't budge, a video was made addressing the reasons why Cobalt should resign his position, and on August 3rd, he would officially give up his spot at the head of the list. On that same day, Nepesta and TGI would take over, sharing the position of list leadership. Nepesta would end up stepping down 2 days later for personal reasons that I won't share, but it just defined how there was a new face of the Lehman's list rising up, with TGI now at the head. To further drive this point home, on August 6th, 3 days later from when the new leaders took over, Delta Blue became co-owner of the list. These individuals could continue to run the operation and rebrand the list under their names, and with Technical and Nepesta rising as very influential players alongside community figures like TGI and Gunnerbones, this would be the new faction of list influencers. The latter half of 2018, though, would be pretty uneventful. There aren't many specific details to circumstance, other than the general rise of the newer leaders like I said just now. One thing that did happen was Gunnerbones making a new Discord bot for the list that would give people in the server roles, depending on the number of demons they had on Pointer Crate. This gave people more reason to join the Discord and interact with the community. The final thing that is noteworthy in 2018 would happen just before the turn of the year, on December 30th, when Technical, Gabs, and Brian the Burger would move up the ranks once more and replace Delta Blue as co-owners with their newfound influence as top players. And with that, we roll into the end of the year. 2018 was definitely a more succinct year than others, as it was less foundational, but it still defined a new faction of list history that left behind old leaders and made way for new owners to move in. 2018 would just be the year for these leaders to get settled in, and 2019 would be when they would really show their influence through list activity. Unfortunately, 2019 would also be the downfall of this new faction, but that means we will also see the rise up of a new, modern organization of leaders. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, let's continue the story of the Demons list into 2019. Just like the beginning of 2018, in the early months of 2019 we got to see a new top 1 demon. With this being somewhat recent history, happening a little under 2 years ago, A lot of you might remember this event. On March 8th, 2019, Zodiac was placed at the #1 spot on the list, hack verified by Xander556. The fact that Xander hacked the level was not known at the time, and it was a revered extreme. It would take a month for the first victor to emerge in the form of Technical, also co-owner of the Demons list. The Zodiac scandal would definitely be the most notable event in the first few months of 2019, as besides that things were quite unexciting, besides Warm Fodder being promoted in June. But that's not to denounce the liveliness of 2019. It would definitely start to pick up as it got underway. One of the biggest changes that came to the list in this year would be over the summer. In July, the list would end up getting extended from 100 to 150, making the main list and extended list both have 75 slots. This is the amount of slots the list has kept until this day. The list was actually extended due to a panic from RobTop raiding tons of extreme demons that had been waiting for a very long time all at once. Rob raided one almost every day in the earlier months of 2019, and this led to the very reasonable fear from the list that levels would get pushed too quickly into the legacy list and the main list would become inaccessible. The list becoming too inaccessible to the less skilled members of the community would lead to not as many people playing extremes as before to get their first list demon. This fall in the amount of people going for list demons would have a huge impact on the playing community and livelihood of not only the players themselves, but also the community spectators. These are the circumstances that called for the extension from 100 to 150. But it's been a year and a half since then, and levels on the list have gotten much harder in our modern day and age. With that considered, why hasn't the list been extended from 150 to 200? This might be a stupefying question, but when you think about it, it's really not much of a problem anymore. This is due to the team prolonging the accessibility of the list, and the FPS bypass being unbanned, as well as players all around just getting better at the game. This means that if the list were ever to be extended to 200, it would not be for a long time, and it would call for some drastic event like what occurred to push the list from 100 to 150. The 2019 extension would overall receive support from the lesser skilled members of the community, as they were now able to beat list demons with more ease. And contrary from the 50 to 100 extension, there were plenty of legacy levels to replace missing spots. The rest of the summer would fly by quite quickly, with the list continuing to operate as usual. But with the extension, there was once again an overwhelming amount of records and not enough dedicated staff to solve the problem. With this immense issue coming up for the 4th or 5th time now, the list staff decided to deal with it once and for all. These changes would come in September of 2019, as well as some shifts in the staffing. List owner TGI would resign on September 7th, leaving the list altogether for the final time since his joining in late 2017. He had done numerous good things for the list, and his leave was definitely a sad one. But back to the problem that was at hand, the overwhelming amount of records that were piling up. In September 2019, the shift system would be introduced by Gunnerbones. The shift system was a new way of managing records in the most efficient manner that the list still uses today, and I will go into detail about how it works here. Prior to the shift system, the method to accept list records consisted of members having to fulfill a quota of a certain amount of list records per week. The flaw in this is that it tended to lead issues with records piling up and complaints being received by community members who had submitted records days ago. And of course, this wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the fact that there was no real way to enforce individual accountability. There was no one to blame for missing a specific record, because records were not assigned to specific list staff, so if someone missed their records, there was no way to reprimand them and make sure they got them done. This meant there was no drive for staff to necessarily finish their quota, and the shift system would be implemented as a much more effective way of accepting records. In summary, the shift system divides time allotments into shifts for individual staff to check records. One shift cycle spans 2 weeks and is divided into 28 time slots of 12 hours each. List staff are assigned to time slots, and they are responsible for checking list records in that time frame. This is a much more effective system, as it holds individuals accountable for records piling up. If the person on shift did not get all their records done without clearing with the team beforehand, they would get a strike, and there is a consequence when a member reaches 3 strikes. The original system caused issues, though, as when someone did end up missing a shift, the next person in line would have twice as many records to check as usual. This led to changes being made so members have 24 hours to complete their shift, and the records required to submit are only the ones submitted within the 12-hour window. The member count from here was usually kept between 20 and 28 members to preserve the functionality of the shift system. Just to be thorough, I'm also going to talk about what it takes to confirm a list record. Checking a record obviously has to do with hack detection, and the list's methods in doing so will be kept private, as well as reviewing the player's old submission history. If the record is suspicious or has something else requiring an additional verification, like a custom LDM or bug fix, the record is marked as under consideration. record accepting can take anywhere from a few hours to a few days. As you can see, the record checking system is a very serious operation, and while it might seem like an easy task, it's really an in-depth process that takes a lot of time and effort. Gunnerbones would get a lot of notoriety within the list for this and all the other things he had done, and on September 23rd, 2019, he would get promoted to co-owner alongside Technical. Despite the mechanical improvements to the system, the biggest downfall in the legacy of 2019 was definitely how the administration was focused on getting top players as staff, and less focused on getting members who had good work ethics. List points and raw skill was overall the biggest factor to recruiting new members, and though that was definitely not a bad call, it also led to there not being enough individuals who could work hard for the organization. But that would be subject to change as the new year loomed over the horizon. Beyond the shift system, the end of 2019 would be uneventful save some staffing changes, where the head mod role would be introduced and Technical would step down as co-owner right before the new year. Brian the Burger and Wormfodder would also step down in November, and Gunnerbones was now the sole owner, but he and the rest of the leaders collectively decided that the owner role wasn't necessary, deciding to remove it and make the leader position the highest role. Something to remember before we close out of 2019 would be Nimbus's promotion to leader around this time. Nimbus was a very hard worker and dedicated staff member, and under his eye as leader, the list would see significant change in many departments in 2020. Nimbus taking on this position would be a hint at things to come, as he would somewhat be the face of change. And as we move on to the next and final full year of our story, we get to see his vision take form and shift the entire landscape of the Demons list. Even from the start of 2020, we would see signs of the list changing entirely. On January 1st, the owner role would be removed permanently and replaced with the leader role. The difference would be that there could be shared power under multiple leaders, and there would not just be one individual who had overarching authority to command the entire list. List staff Poi would also be promoted on January 2nd. Nimbus would be the first leader, of course, as he was the list owner when this policy was implemented. But Nimbus would not be the only leader. The idea was that other owner-like figures would eventually be promoted to stand by his side and increase the integrity and strength of the heads behind the list decisions. But for the time being, Nimbus would be the only leader. As I am sure you all are aware, in early 2020 we would also receive a new top 1 demon. This would be Tartarus, a level verified by Dolphy. It would get placed as top 1 in February despite it actually being verified in early January. This was because Dolphy was under large suspicion for hacking, but after numerous live tests and streams, the team concluded that there was no definitive evidence to prove Dolphy of cheating. With this said, the level was rated and placed at number 1 on the 10th of the second month in 2020. The results of the Dolphy inspection would not exactly be publicized by the list, but they would just further show how in-depth the list went into these things, and how educated they had become on hack detection in the community. They had acquired some of the best minds for that sort of thing in the game at this point, which was a result of how professional the operation had become. Our first leadership alteration in 2020 would occur in the month after February. On April 14th, list staff Moosh would be promoted to become the second leader alongside Nimbus. Nimbus and Moosh would, together alongside with other Prime list staff, organize a new extension of the Demons list in that same month. This would be the private project server, made in April of 2020. This would be the starting grounds for the Demon List YouTube channel, and all the branches that have extended from there, most notably their Demons List Highlights YouTube series. The Demons List YouTube trailer was published to their channel in May, and the first highlights would be released a month later as well as an application announcement. This would be the first time there was an open application form for the list, proving again how much the leadership was changing in the mindset of the operation. 2020 would be the beginning of the mental transition behind who got in the list and who did not. Unlike prior ideologies the list held, the new staff now believed it should be less of a consideration of list points and skill of the game, and more based around work ethic and what the new list members could bring to the team. Interviews were beginning to be conducted more and more for promising inclusions to the list team, as well as applications being opened up on more than one occasion beyond the one we saw in May. But these would not be the only events of significance in May. This would definitely be one of the craziest months for 2020 for the list, as big change was coming for the rules and policy under the leadership of Nimbus and Moosh. The catalyst for these changes would take form on May 5th, when PyPass would be introduced to the community. PyPass was a new version of the FPS bypass that did not technically require an external program, and instead exploited the functioning of the game to change your FPS value. It's a long and complicated explanation, so instead of detailing it, I will link a video Gizbro published about it in the description. Gizbro's video would also be pretty influential on our timeline here, as it would address the bypass, how it was not a hack, and would attempt to convince the list to allow it to be used for records. Alongside this movement of allowing the bypass in the list, the age-old discussion of unbanning the bypass was brought back to the realm of possibility. Even prior to these events, the bypass discussions had resurfaced within the list as staff members learned more and more about it and how it wasn't necessarily cheating. But a big fear of unbanning the bypass was the list being overwhelmed by incoming records. There was a high estimate of some 2,000 plus records that would come in for the list to be accepted if the bypass was unbanned, as they all had been beaten with bypass but never submitted because of its ban. This amount of records at once would overwhelm the list in its current state and collapse the smooth functioning of the operation. Despite these concerns, the bypass provoked large discussion inside and outside of the list. The team initially was going to ban the bypass due to it being a game exploit. This statement, however, caused a lot of questions for staff who didn't understand it, and a team conference was organized to go into more depth about it. This conference would completely shift the tide of the debate. In this one discussion, most attending staff completely switched sides. Because of this, the team eventually reached a consensus that it was right to allow the bypass, with the votes being overwhelmingly one-sided by the end of the discussion. They also decided it was right to finally allow the bypass in the list, in this conference too, because of its similarity to bypass. And on May 25th, history was made for the list, with bypass being officially unbanned and bypass being allowed. The list definitely did the right thing in the correct manner here, as they made sure to take the time with the decision and reach a logical conclusion that was fully explainable as to avoid public backlash. This being said, they needed to back up their claims. So how did the list come to this conclusion after so many years of pushing it down? After talking to some staff who walked me through it, some of the realizations that helped them reach this outcome were as follows. The first is that 2.2 is going to have a built-in FPS bypass, meaning the concept was endorsed by RobTop. While the list does have separate rules and more knowledge than RobTop, it also raised the question of whether hacking automatically equals cheating, which it doesn't. The team then came to the conclusion that a hack would need to be more than just something that modifies the game's code in order to be banned by the list. They also considered the effects of bypass and bypass on a monitor, and how people were already submitting bypass records without knowing it was banned. With it being very hard to tell bypass records apart, these falsely submitted records were getting accepted sometimes. On top of this, it was argued that the usage of higher hertz in general was already an exploit of the game, and it's inconsistent to leave that allowed in the list but not the bypass and bypass. Of course, the list wasn't going to ban high refresh rate monitors, so it only made sense to either get rid of all these exploits or allow them for everyone. These are the things that the list discussed when unbanning the bypass and allowing the bypass, and it was definitely a day of celebration for the lower refresh rate monitor members of the community. This would be a day and a month that would change everything forever for the list and the community. But I'm sure I do not have to stress that point, having seen how deep-rooted the history of the bypass debate is through this video, and having known how far we have come with difficulty in the latter half of 2020 now that it has been unbanned. But funnily enough, this would not be the end of the fun for the month of May. While all these events were going on, a few extra noteworthy things had happened. Blaze, a hard-working and prominent staff member of the list, would get promoted to be the third leader, as well as the Golden being verified by Nswish and being placed at number 1 on May 30th. While the Golden would eventually be moved down to number 2 under Tartarus, it was certainly crazy for the community to have a new top 1 not even 3 months after the old one was placed. But even after all this, there would be one final notable event in May of 2020. This would be the revision of the progress formula. Prior to this, there would be numerous issues with it and how it behaved, but the new one will be revised and released in the 5th month of the year. This is a complicated topic, but I'm still going to explain it here in this video. Well, actually, I'm a little bit too uninformed to really explain it and have it actually make sense for everyone. So instead, I have gotten Nimbus from the Demons List staff to help me out in explaining it in a sensible manner. So, I will let him take the stage.
Ever since the introduction of the Pointer Crate Stats Viewer, earning list points has become one of the primary motivators for players to grind out list demons and submit records to the list team. However, that begs the question, how exactly do we calculate these list points? When the website was first created, the list consisted of only the top 50 hardest demons. There was no extended list back then. As such, players could submit records for either beating a level or achieving progress above the level's set requirement. This graph shows the very first points formula the list ever used. The vertical axis here represents how many points the players earned from beating the level, and the horizontal axis represents the level's current placement on the list. The formula looks complicated, but the key takeaway is that it's based on the variable L, or the length of the demon list. This dependence allows the formula to naturally adapt to the eventual extension of the list that would happen later in 2017. After the top 100 was introduced, there was a new value for L, so the formula was adjusted to what you see here. The points formula did not change too much throughout 2018, but in February 2019, some discussions began to arise within the team regarding possible changes. Looking at the old curve, the debates were more than understandable. A level placed at 30 was worth only 10 points more than a level 50 spots lower, and the number 10 demon was only worth half as much as the number 1 demon. Even so, finding a new formula that works well with the top 100 was challenging to say the least. By early March 2019, there were 4 new possible formulas on the table, contributed by both Poison and Stardust. On March 8th, 2019, we finally settled on this for the new and improved points formula. Everything in the top 40 got a massive boost in value, and the points declined much more steadily through the extended list so that the bottom 50 wasn't overvalued compared to the rest. This formula worked pretty well until mid-2019 when the list was extended to the top 150. We found out that levels within the 101 to 150 range awarded practically no points, so the formula was adjusted yet again to what we know and love today. So how does the current points formula even work? It's designed so that the demon at the top is worth exactly 150 points, because there are 150 demons on the list currently. In addition, the level at the very bottom of the list, number 150, is worth exactly 5 points. We agreed that an exponential decrease is best because as you climb the list, difficulty seems to get exponentially higher. It ensures that players reaching for the very top get plenty of list points, whereas those that can quickly grind through top 50 levels, which are still quite challenging, are still competitive with those that take much longer on top 10s. Now is a good time to talk about how we calculate progress points as well. When Pointer Crate was first introduced, there was unfortunately a bug in the website's implementation that caused progress records to have no value other than bragging rights on the level's leaderboards. That has since been fixed, and players can now submit progress records above the requirement for any level in the main list. Each of these levels has a value for a 100% completion based on the points formula, but the points earned from a progress record is based on a progress multiplier, which decreases this total value according to how much progress the player achieved. This graph shows the formula for the progress multiplier that we use today. The vertical axis represents the percentage of the total points that the player earns from the progress, and the horizontal axis represents the progress the player earned on the level. It's designed to give exactly 10% of the level's total value at the minimum progress requirement, with an exponential increase towards 50% as the player gets closer to beating it. We set the limit to only half the total value to encourage players to finish off levels they start, so beating any list demon will always give the majority of the level's point value. The current progress formula might not seem interesting at first glance, but it corresponds to a humorous bit of list history that happened last year. The progress formula was implemented on May 15th, 2020, but there were also some team discussions about the normal points formula as well. More specifically, we were toying with the idea of making top 10s more valuable, but never found anything that everyone agreed on. However, due to a miscommunication between the team and Stardust, we accidentally put in a formula that featured a massive jump between demons number 11 and 10. It looked sort of like this. Needless to say, this change was reverted less than a week later, but it definitely caused a lot of chaos at the time. So yeah, sorry about that.
Before moving on, I do want to sincerely thank Nimbus for writing and voicing that part of the video. He's been a huge help, and I hope he helped you all understand the progress formula a bit better. Anyway, we are reaching the end of the eventful part of 2020. The last months of the summer would be somewhat saturated with notoriety, as Demon's List staff Vinny would become the 4th and final leader on June 29th. In July, the Demon's List bot would break and all actions related to it would be transferred to the site. Those are the mostly final things worth talking about in 2020. The list did make another notable decision in September and October, which was deciding against the FPS bypass cap being raised to 360. Prior to the introduction of 360Hz monitors, the FPS cap for bypass when it was unbanned was set to 300 FPS. Obviously, with 360Hz monitors becoming a much more real prospect, the FPS cap was considered to be raised to match that. However, the list decided against leveling it with new monitors. This was because they had already decided that anything beyond 300 FPS made the game behave erratically, and while 360Hz monitors wouldn't be banned, anything beyond 300 FPS on a non-native 360Hz monitor would not be allowed in the list record. Beyond that decision, there would be nothing else noteworthy that would occur in 2020. But you're still missing some things. Of course, as of publishing this video, it is early February 2021. We've had about a month and a week of 2021, and there have definitely been some interesting developments to briefly mention in this new year. So, let's talk about 2021 before we close out this story. "2021 definitely started out with a bang. Though we've only had such a limited time since this video was published to talk about any sort of notable events, there are some surprisingly significant things to mention. The first occurred only on the 2nd day of January, one day after the new year. For a very long time, the list struggled with conveying their policy and having a detailed enough rule system for everyone to clearly understand. This was because their rules were kept on Discord, and there was no place for the site to view them, as well as the rules not being entirely well written in some areas. Due to this issue, on January 2nd, fully revised and incredibly detailed guidelines would be officially published for all to see on the Point to Create website. This migration would allow for those who didn't have a Discord or didn't know of the server's existence to see them and submit records according to the rules. Of course, it should be somewhat self-explanatory why this is such a key development for the list, and it's surprising it took so long to be implemented. Nevertheless, it's a feature that has been a long time coming, and it's good to finally see it on the Point to Create website itself, even if it took until 2021 to do so. The next and final event we have to detail for this video is definitely one of great proportion. In late January, Bloodbath, the extreme top 1 demon verified in August of 2015 that held its position strong for over a year, dangled off the extended list at spot number 150. And on January 27th, the list team had come to the decision to decrease the list from a top 150 to a top 149, kicking Bloodbath off the extended list. Yes, this really happened. But though that was a joke and the list was quickly reverted, on January 29th, AlphaBot X would be added to the list at spot 136, officially pushing Bloodbath off the list for good. This level was a landmark extreme that held strong despite the 5 years it resided on the list, and knowing from this video how it was the first big top 1 demon to cement itself as a legitimate verification for the list, it doesn't have to be stressed how monumental of an occasion this is, even if you didn't experience firsthand the once-in-a-lifetime magic Bloodbath held in its wake during its prime. This is an amazing thread of closure that ties the ever-expanding and vast knot that is the history of the Demons list. After the foundation set in 2014 by Lugia, and its reimbursement by iFrusternotch, and eventually Riot and his staff, to the official website headed by Cobalt and his legion of admins, to all the ownership changes that occurred in the TGI, Technical, and Apesta era of the list, to the amazing team and leaders we have today, in the form of Nimbus, Vinny, Blaze, and Moosh, the list has seriously come such a long way throughout the many years of its existence. To see such a well-built operation from such an unstable foundation is an inspiring vision, and there are so many key players that made the list possible, from unknown ones like Stardust, who brought the list to a level of professionalism we know for today, to Nimbus and the new age of leaders who helped fix many past mistakes that tarnished the list's integrity. Being able to list every essential unrecognized player in this time capsule of video was definitely a joy. With such a now well-made and improved staffing group and detailed foundation, it is doubtless to express that the list will carry on to be the crutch of the Geometry Dash community's interest in extreme demons for many years to come. This group of players coming together for this simple list has done so many wonders to keep this game alive and build a more serious and white-collared approach to the community. Though these few events we have of 2021 are the last pages of the story for now, it will continue past this video, and with all the brilliant futures that the list has to look forward to, I hope one day someone can pick up where I left off and continue to tell this amazing story of chance, mistake, and hard work through all matter. For now, we can close this incredibly detailed chapter book, but there are definitely still pages left unwritten, and I look forward to what amazing legacies this institution has in store for us in the future. And there it is, the full history of the Geometry Dash Demons list. I already went through all my closing video ties back to the beginning and middle parts at the end of the 2021 section, so I won't repeat that in the conclusion. That doesn't mean I don't have anything to say though. Instead, I want to first thank everyone who made this video possible. First off, I'd like to give a huge, massive message of appreciation for Nimbus, Blaze, and Cobalt. These three were incredibly helpful and more than willing to give me the assistance I needed in digging up old info and getting the picture of the older times in the demons list. But they definitely weren't the only ones who helped. I also want to thank Moosh, Vinny, Delta Blue, Heinz, Stardust, Noise, Zeronium, and anyone else who helped me out. These guys are seriously awesome, and this delivery of information would not have been at all possible without them. This was definitely an in-depth research project, and it took me some 4 weeks to put it all together, so I'm very relieved to finally have it all done. I apologize for this video being quite lengthy, but despite my efforts to keep it short, it still ended up very long. That's just how things are, though. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one, as I really put my all into it and I hope it shows. If you seriously watched through all of this and are still listening to me, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart. You guys are the best and you're my motivation to keep going with YouTube, so keep being so awesomely supportive. I will continue to do my best in return. Thank you for watching all of this. I really hope you guys liked it, and I appreciate your time. I love you all, and I will see you guys in the next one.